Hello, in this demo we are going to show how we can design bone reduction guides and surgical guides for a case like this. This is a typical four-arch retentionless upper jaw case. From the CT data, we can clearly see the patient's bone has a very low density on the posterior side, and the anterior side it's okay. In order to design bone reduction guides, we would need a good bone model, because with GuideMia, the bone reduction guides always sit on the patient's bone structure in order to have a good stability and accuracy of the surgery. Now, if we take a look at this bone structure, if we adjust the threshold to a lower value, posterior side, something similar like to that. But if we go too low, as we can tell, the anterior got a lot of noise. If the threshold goes higher, we have no way to build a posterior surface model out of the CT data. So what we are going to do is we're going to create multiple segments for the bone structure with different threshold values and then combine them for surgical guide design purpose. Now, let's go to the bone segmentation to demonstrate how can we create a segment of the bone structure. For the first segment we're going to create will be on the posterior side. So we will drag the handles here so we get the region of interest box in the posterior side only. Now we can go lower on the threshold value so we can see a better bone structure like this, and we can go even lower. The lower you go, the more pixels you get. So if we look at different orientations, that looks okay. Value, we can probably go a little bit lower. That looks good. If we look at the bone structure area, we can't go further lower. Now we will trim this area, use the scatter tool. So we add a seed point first on this area. Then we use the scatter tool to remove materials here and the surrounding area. Or we can leave it as is. Let's remove this piece a little bit more. Now we will use our tissue pinning simulation function to fix the bone area. Now we have a better bone structure, but if we go a little bit higher on this value, now we have a quite clear bone model on the posterior side. What we are going to do now is we will tell the system by using this button saying, okay, consider this area as a segment of my bone structure. So basically we will select this area. What it does is the system will actually create a piece of material like this to represent the bone structure. And in the meantime, we can right click on this, take a look. If we want to export the STL file, we can do it right from here. That's how we add one segment of the bone structure. We actually can then move the region of interest box to the anterior lower the threshold, do segmentation, circle this area, and then we do the other side of the posterior, then we end up with 3 segments. So that's all the segments we have. So we have created 2 of them before. So we check it's our first segment, second segment, the third segment. And we have 3 segments of bone. They look all good. Design time, we are going to combine them into one base for surgical guide design. Now, because we want to do bone reduction, we can go to bone reduction operation. Or if we want to do prosthesis guide, we can load the denture design first. We load our denture design. We register this denture with radiographic guide by adding 3 pairs of markers. So we add all those points. Say, okay, finish the alignment. And we can go to treatment planning part. We have placed the implants and anchor pins beforehand. All we need to do here is to define the bone reduction level. So we go to bone reduction definition. This is different from our previous version. We move now the bone reduction operation here so that we can not only show bone, we can also have access to all the other models like radiographic guide, denture, etc. So we have a better idea how the bone reduction surface is. For this case, if we lower the bone reduction surface, you can see those implants actually. So those are the entrance, the platform of the implants. We want to rotate the view like this, and we can use middle button to move up this plane. So that's about right. Then we will tell the system, okay, this is our bone reduction area. Let's do the cutting. So we define the cutting area. Remember, we will have a denture here. We will have prosthesis guide based on a denture model. So we want to keep enough clearance from here so we can completely include the front teeth of the denture. Then we drag this one to define the cutting height. We can go lower than the plane, upper than the plane, or right on the spot. Then we generate the preview of the bone reduction. Now we generate the bone reduction guide model. If we want to take a look, we minimize this window for a while. We go to our object list, look at the reduced bone model. This model is created by combining the 3 sections of the bone structures we created and by the bone reduction. That's how we make the base for the surgical guide design. Now we can go to surgical guide design. Tell the system we are going to do bone reduction guide. So we choose bone reduction guide. So we can see our sleeves implants are below this surface area, anchor pins, and the bone model is the base. So for designing the surgical guide, we need to get a piece of area on the model by selecting the boundary or use this circle and cutting tool. We go to the posterior a little bit more. We probably want to avoid this sharp edge. Then we will say cut this area and generate my guides. GuideMia Plateau guide will include bone reduction guides, surgical guide, and a prosthesis guide. And most importantly, this bone reduction guide and surgical guide will be sitting on the bone structure, which is or sit on the bone model, which is a combination of multiple segments from the patient's bone structure. In the next demo, we are going to show how can we combine not only bone segments but also soft tissue area to design surgical guide. Let's look forward to it. Now let's wait for the guide to be finished. Now the initial guide has been created, and we split the initial guide into lower part, which is the bone reduction guide, and part of the surgical guide. Then the surgical guide, which is this purple piece, and a prosthesis guide that will sit onto the bone reduction guide. As usual, we can add connectors so that we can connect bone reduction guide and the surgical guide, or bone reduction guide and the prosthesis guide. Just click this button and pick a point on the bone reduction guide. You can move this box. That's going to be our connector area. Rotate this view a little bit. So we click this button again. We will add a slot on the bone reduction guide and a connector on the surgical guide and on the prosthesis guide. The system has very well taken care of the size of the shape. So the bone reduction guide, once the bone reduction guide is placed, the surgical guide and the prosthesis guide can very well sit onto this. Just click on. Now let's go to our planning part to review the guides. This is our prosthesis guide. This is a connector we add. Typically, you would want to add multiple connectors surrounding the implant site. Then this is our surgical guide. Top part is set onto the bone reduction guide. So this accomplishes our demo for design GuideMia Plateau guide with multiple segments of bone structures.